When does a headache become a migraine? And when is it something that you can treat just by drinking more water? And when should you go to the ER? Y'all asked, so I'm answering your plea about what are the different types of headaches, as well as migraine, what causes them, how can you tell them apart, and how can you treat them? Now, a reminder before I begin, I'm a PhD neuroscientist, not an MD doctor, and for sure not a neurologist. So if you are having continuous headaches, if you have them come out of nowhere, go see one of those people and don't just listen to what I have to say. So someone who was diagnosed with migraine at the age of 8, I thought a migraine attack was something that you couldn't really discuss. There's no good words to explain what it felt like. I always figured it was the Supreme Court saying, for pornography, you know it when you see it. For a migraine attack, you know it when you see it, or in this case, feel it. And it's true. I've had a lot of people who didn't have a migraine until later in life, and they're like, oh yeah, I definitely didn't know what that was. But it turns out that there's a lot of good research out there on this. Now, is it significantly underfunded? Yes, it for sure is. Especially given the number of people who actually have things like migraine, as well as things like cluster headaches and tension headache. The research does really help us differentiate between the different types. So the first thing that you need to know is that there are two main types of headaches. There's primary and there's secondary. So primary is that you actually have a headache disorder. So this is something that's kind of a lifelong migraine disorder. And secondary headaches have an underlying cause that is not just having a disorder. So it's not really its own diagnosis. There's something else going on that's leading to that headache. So under the primary headache category, you kind of have 4 different types of disorders. First, you have tension headaches. These are the most common types of headaches. Second, you have migraine. So in terms of most common, migraine disorder is second. Third is trigeminal autonomic cephalalgia, which, by the way, incredibly difficult to say. So that is cluster headaches, as well as other things that you should talk to your neurologist about, definitely not me. And then fourth are just other types of headache disorder. So things that don't really fit into those categories. And there are a number of ways that you kind of can tell the difference between the different types of headaches. So for example, one of the main questions you can ask is, when does it happen? So there are things like hypnic headaches, which are basically headaches, these are pretty rare, in which somebody wakes up at a specific time every night. We're talking about 1 a.m. or 3 a.m. Their head wakes them up by pounding for 15 minutes to 4 hours, and then they can, I guess, maybe be able to fall back asleep again. And this happens pretty much every night. That type of headache sounds just incredibly rude. So you have that, which is occurring during sleep. Then you also have other headaches, so other types of these primary headache disorders that just basically have headaches show up during a specific activity. So when you are exercising, when you are having sex, when you are wearing an overly tight hat, so something like a beanie, which that might be a regional thing that now that I think about it. Beanie is the thing that you wear in winter that goes really tight to your head. Tell me if there's a different name for that. So when it occurs can tell you about what type of headache it is. And all of those are primary headache disorders. If somebody just basically gets a headache every time they exercise, yeah, there's a disorder for that. You can also tell the difference between different types of headaches based on the type of pain. Is it a short, incredibly stabbing pain that typically lasts only a few seconds? Yeah, that is an ice pick headache. Does it feel like there's a shock going down the entire side of your face? Yeah, that might be trigeminal neuralgia, which is more likely to occur in older women, and it is typically a nerve problem. Is it dull? Not really throbbing, but just kind of going over the top of your head? Yeah, that might be a tension headache, and those are the most common. But if you have migraine, then it could actually just be a migraine. There are also things like silent migraines, which I've experienced before. It's incredibly weird. You get all of the symptoms of a migraine except for that throbbing pain. And that is another specific characteristic of migraine. So that throbbing pain, in some cases it can only be one-sided, but it doesn't need to be. That sometimes has an aura associated with it. So you can have a visual aura, so you get a blind spot or a little ghost floating in front of you, and that typically lasts an hour, and then you get the migraine symptoms. Or you don't need to have aura. Migraine is messed up, so that's why I'm doing an entire video on it, because it is kind of confusing. Also, how long it lasts matters. So a migraine attack, a single one, typically only lasts about 3 days, whereas a tension type headache might last up to a week. But if you have a migraine attack and then you take certain medications for it, can give you rebound migraine attacks. But then the last incredibly important way to tell them apart is basically where they're occurring. So there's something known as a nummular headache, which is basically a headache that is a very small, coin size, that just kind of appears as pain in that one one very targeted area. And if it occurs around like your sinuses, that could be like something like a sinus infection that's causing a headache. But in a lot of cases, it's just migraine again. And so what it's actually presenting is just pain around that area. So a lot of sinus headaches are not sinus headaches, they're just migraine attacks. Do you have targeted pain around one specific eye that makes that eye water and feels so incredibly painful that you don't even have words that describe it? Yeah, that's probably a cluster headache, which more actually often occur in males compared to like the female-male divide that we typically see. Does the headache pain kind of go around, end up in your neck, and then maybe go even down into the like shoulder area? That could be cervicogenic headaches, which are basically an actual like nerve problem. And then you can look at other symptoms too, like are you nauseated? Do you have light sensitivity? Do you have chemical sensitivity? Like you're smelling, I don't know, chemicals in lab like I typically do. And you're like, yep, nope, that's bad. That, again, probably migraine. Now, figuring out which type of headache or migraine it is, that actually really helps you figure out like how much you should be worried about it and also what the treatment is. So migraine has specific treatments, but then we also see that like maybe it's one of those secondary headaches. So the secondary headaches are caused by something else. And we see that there are a lot of different like secondary headache causes. So you could be like sleep deprived. And like sleep deprivation falls under this category of homeostatic problems. Like you didn't drink enough, you didn't eat enough, you didn't have enough caffeine, or maybe you have eye strain from staring at the computer too long, or maybe you have TMJ. Like all of these are secondary headaches. And so this idea that we can treat those, yeah, you just treat the underlying problem and that should help with the headache. And some of these require like immediate treatment. Like if you've ever heard of a thunderclap headache, that is where basically you were just like existing in your everyday life and all of a sudden it feels like lightning struck your head, like immediate searing pain going through your brain. If you experience that, yeah, you should go to the hospital. Like that might be an aneurysm. But then there are other types of headaches that are incredibly like innocent. So like brain freeze, they're saying that like maybe around 30% of people have had brain freeze, but that's like where you drink something cold or you have something cold immediately pressed on you and we think that like the blood vessels constricting causes you to feel pain. Like that is not really that big of a problem. Like so much to the extent that I actually just thought it was something that everybody experienced. So the next time your head starts pounding, start to think about like, what are the actual qualities of it? Is it throbbing and pulsing? Maybe more of a migraine. Is it immediate and severe? Yeah, go see your doctor. Think about how well you've been functioning as a human being in the last couple of days. Have you been drinking enough water? Have you been eating enough food? Have you been not stressed enough? Maybe try to treat some of those things. But also, don't just tell people that like if they have a migraine or if they have a cluster headache, that all they really need to do is just drink more water. That doesn't work either. All of these different types of pain are telling us different things, so let's start listening to them.